No one saw it coming, not even the most seasoned political insiders. On a quiet Wednesday morning, just as the headlines were preparing to pivot to a new week of distractions, a sealed federal dossier was quietly filed in Washington, D.C. Its contents, unknown to the public, sent tremors through the West Wing and set off a chain reaction across California's government. Donald J. Trump, long dismissed as politically wounded after years of investigations and battles, had just made what his team called the Endgame move. And at the center of it stood Gavin Newsom. The former president appeared unexpectedly in front of the press at Mar-a-Lago, flanked by his top legal counsel and two former intelligence officials. With his signature composure sharpened by something new, an almost surgical precision, Trump said only this: Governor Newsom thought he could run unchecked. Today, we turn the page. The evidence we're releasing isn't just political, it's criminal. And the American people deserve to see it all. The room erupted. That same hour, a federal courier delivered binders of documents to Capitol Hill and the Department of Justice, marked, top priority, multi-state procurement emergency powers abuse. It was clear now, Trump and his legal task force had been quietly building a case, threading through emergency contracts, pandemic-era powers, and interstate political dealings linked directly to Newsom's office. By nightfall, conservative networks were ablaze with leaks of insider memos and whistleblower testimonies. Even some centrist outlets were caught off guard by the gravity of the documents. But the most stunning piece wasn't in the paper trail. It was the voice recording, one that allegedly captured a private conversation between Newsom and a now disgraced DNC strategist. If we can keep the pressure on the feds, they'll back off. They always do. Just keep Trump tangled up in lawsuits long enough for 2028. The recording spread like wildfire. And Trump? He wasn't done. By sunrise the next morning, California's Capitol building was swarming, not with protesters or press, but with federal investigators. Quiet subpoenas were served to 3 senior aides in Governor Gavin Newsom's administration. Word quickly spread, this wasn't just politics anymore. It was a full-scale federal probe. Trump's legal team, bolstered by former federal prosecutors and policy analysts, held another press briefing. This time, they named names. We're talking about coordinated misuse of emergency powers, announced former DOJ official Caroline Marks. This isn't a paperwork error. This is systematic redirection of federal emergency funds into politically favored contracts and causes. And we have the receipts. Newsom's camp went into immediate damage control. Spokespeople blasted the accusations as a far-right witch hunt. Yet, noticeably absent from their response was any attempt to deny the core evidence, especially the leaked recording. And then came the second blow. Trump's team released a digital timeline showing how Newsom allegedly greenlit a series of lucrative contracts with shell companies during the COVID-19 pandemic, many of them tied back to donors and consultants with deep ties to DNC leadership. One company, awarded $42 million in just 3 months, had no prior history in medical logistics. The revelation stunned even some of Newsom's supporters. State auditors who had previously been sidelined were now being called in for emergency briefings. One, speaking anonymously, told a Sacramento outlet, "There's been internal pressure to avoid digging too deep. But this changes everything." As public trust in Newsom's leadership began to wobble, Trump delivered the third punch, not in court, but in the form of a strategic endorsement. From a packed stage in Phoenix, he declared, "This isn't about red or blue anymore. This is about accountability. And I promise you, we're just getting started." Newsom's team scrambled to prepare a legal rebuttal. But behind the scenes, Democratic donors began calling, and not to offer help. The tremors reached deep into the Democratic National Committee. Private group chats between strategists, donors, and governors lit up with one repeating question: how much more does Trump have? At a hastily assembled DNC emergency call, key power brokers, some of whom had backed Newsom as a potential 2028 contender, openly questioned whether he had become a liability. What began as party-wide denial was rapidly turning into strategic retreat. One insider, overheard during a muted moment on the Zoom call, muttered, "We handed him California. And now he's turning it into a battlefield." Meanwhile, Trump's team was methodically dropping evidence in waves, leaked emails, redacted bank transfers, even a procurement audit that had been buried by the California Office of Emergency Services. Each file release came with one message: more to come. At the same time, political operatives on both sides of the aisle began shifting their positions. Moderates who had previously backed Newsom started distancing themselves. A well-known Democratic senator from the Midwest publicly stated, "If these allegations are true, they demand immediate accountability, regardless of party." Inside the Newsom administration, pressure was building. Two deputy officials resigned within hours of each other, both citing personal reasons. But sources within the Capitol said they were advised to step down before federal interviews began. Then came the televised moment that signaled a real shift. At a press briefing in Sacramento, a reporter directly asked Newsom, "Governor, did your office knowingly steer pandemic funds to politically connected firms?" For the first time in years, Newsom looked cornered. He didn't answer immediately. He blinked, glanced at his lawyer, and finally replied, "I have no personal involvement in any wrongdoing. Any further questions on that will be handled legally." The headlines the next morning were brutal: Newsom dodges direct question as pressure mounts, donors in retreat, governor's inner circle cracking. Meanwhile, Trump, knowing the storm he'd unleashed, remained unusually calm. From his Truth Social account, he posted just one line: "The endgame is just beginning." The hammer dropped at 10:14 a.m. on a Friday. A sealed affidavit, previously buried in an internal ethics complaint, was unsealed by a federal judge at the request of Trump's legal team, and it contained the most explosive development yet. A former senior procurement officer in California's Department of Public Health, Elena Vargas, had flipped. In a confidential deposition filmed weeks earlier, Vargas testified under oath that Governor Newsom was not only aware of the redirected funds, he approved them personally. She detailed meetings in the governor's private conference room where emergency contract bids were reviewed, not for merit, but for loyalty. The question wasn't whether the company could deliver, Vargas said. The question was always, are they with us politically? That was the filter. The video was never meant to go public, but Trump's team legally maneuvered to release a transcript and key portions of the footage. And when the networks aired the clip that night, the public reaction was immediate and furious. Even mainstream anchors looked stunned. Meanwhile, rumors swirled that Vargas was now under federal protection, relocated outside of California due to threats and intense pressure in recent weeks. Her testimony had the weight of documentation, emails, calendar logs, and handwritten notes with the governor's initials on several contract approval memos. By midnight, Gavin Newsom's press secretary issued a brief, tightly worded statement: "The governor unequivocally denies all accusations made in this politically motivated leak. Legal steps will be taken against any false and defamatory claims." But it was too late. Within 24 hours, 3 congressional oversight committees called for an emergency joint hearing. The DOJ's Public Integrity Section confirmed it was reviewing Vargas's deposition for possible criminal referral. Behind the scenes, Trump's advisors were already preparing the next phase. "This wasn't just about exposing corruption," one aide said. "It's about accountability and restoring trust." For the first time since the case erupted, whispers began circulating not about impeachment or resignation, but about indictment. And while the political world scrambled, Trump stood before a roaring crowd in Georgia and delivered the line that would echo across every headline in America: Gavin Newsom didn't just betray California. He betrayed the whole country. And now, justice is coming. The morning after Trump's rally, the word indictment wasn't just trending, it was dominating every major network. Cable pundits, legal analysts, and even skeptical Democrats couldn't ignore what was unfolding: the mounting pile of evidence, the on-the-record testimony from Elena Vargas, and the governor's increasingly vague denials. Behind closed doors in D.C., high-level discussions were already underway. A DOJ spokesperson, when pressed by multiple reporters, gave the most revealing response yet: we do not confirm or deny active investigations. But we take all sworn testimony and supporting documentation very seriously, especially when involving high-ranking public officials. That was the closest thing to a public warning Newsom had received. Meanwhile, inside the California state legislature, fractures were becoming impossible to hide. Lawmakers from both parties began demanding transparency. A bipartisan letter signed by 46 state representatives formally requested the governor testify, under oath, before a state oversight panel. Newsom refused. Within hours of that refusal, anonymous leaks emerged from federal law enforcement circles. A grand jury had been quietly convened. And then, the unexpected happened. A redacted document was leaked, showing that a federal judge had already signed off on multiple search warrants for communications involving the governor's chief of staff, legal counsel, and 2 outside consultants. The implication was clear: prosecutors weren't just fishing, they believed they had something. That same night, Trump took the stage in North Carolina. This time, he didn't hold back. They said I was the one bending the law. They said I was the danger to democracy. But look at California. Look at what's rotting under the surface. Newsom's swamp makes D.C. look like a chapel. The crowd roared as chants of "lock him up" broke out, louder than any since 2016. In Sacramento, things grew even darker for Newsom. A longtime political ally, State Senator Marsha Bellamy, broke ranks during a CNN appearance. If these facts hold up, I think he needs to step down. We cannot lead through scandal. And just like that, what started as a slow leak had turned into a flood. California was on the edge of political chaos. Trump's war room called it a checkmate in slow motion. By the following week, Governor Gavin Newsom's administration was teetering on the brink of collapse. The grand jury proceedings had accelerated. Subpoenas were issued to more than a dozen individuals in Newsom's inner circle, and several were seen entering a federal courthouse in Los Angeles under tight security and behind tinted glass SUVs. Reporters caught snippets from one staffer's lawyer: "We're cooperating fully. My client has nothing to hide, unlike some others." The political narrative had shifted completely. What once seemed like a partisan stunt was now a full-blown federal storm, and Gavin Newsom was at its center. That Thursday morning, the Washington Post broke the headline that delivered the knockout: DOJ reviewing evidence for possible indictment of California governor. The article cited unnamed sources within the public integrity section who claimed the case had reached a critical threshold. The final decision would now rest with Attorney General Merrick Garland, but insiders said prosecutors had built an airtight narrative of misconduct, abuse of power, and willful misappropriation of federal resources. Newsom's office went into panic mode. A planned public appearance was cancelled. A statement was released denying the Post report and attacking politically motivated actors trying to dismantle state leadership. But by then, even Newsom's defenders were exhausted. The silence from the Biden administration was deafening. No support. No public statement. No cover. And then, the pressure cracked. On a cold Friday evening, Newsom's chief legal counsel resigned, effective immediately. That same night, an emergency session was held between Democratic Party leadership in California. For the first time, resignation was openly discussed. Not just to salvage the party, but to save Newsom from indictment. Meanwhile, Trump was watching it all unfold, almost silently now. His team had gone dark, withholding further evidence and refusing interviews. Rumors swirled that more bombshells remained sealed, timed and ready. From his private estate in Bedminster, Trump released a single statement: "The swamp is deeper than we thought. But we're draining it. One governor at a time." Saturday morning arrived with a chilling sense of anticipation. Federal agents had reportedly completed their initial round of interviews. Several figures from within Gavin Newsom's pandemic procurement team had quietly retained criminal defense attorneys. Cable news networks were now running countdowns, not to a court date, but to a possible governor's resignation. Then came the whispers of a deal. Sources close to both the DOJ and the California State Attorney General's office leaked the same thing: back-channel talks were underway. The DOJ was allegedly weighing whether to allow Newsom to step down in exchange for avoiding a criminal trial. But the deal had conditions, namely, full cooperation, a public admission of administrative misconduct, and permanent withdrawal from future federal office. That last clause stung. It would kill his 2028 presidential aspirations instantly. Within Newsom's circle, panic turned to open division. Some advisors urged him to fight, "You're innocent, and they'll smell weakness." Others said survival was now about minimizing damage, to his name, to his family, and to the party. At the same time, Trump's silence became thunderous. His surrogates flooded airwaves with surgical precision. On Fox, former DNI Richard Grenell said, "Newsom won't just walk away clean. If he thinks he can resign and sweep this under the rug, he's wrong. The American people demand more than a shrug and a plane ticket." On MSNBC, Democratic strategists appeared cornered. When asked whether Newsom should resign, one veteran consultant finally admitted, "If there's a deal on the table, he should take it. We're not just talking optics anymore. We're talking criminal exposure." Then, late that night, something unprecedented happened. A confidential DOJ memo was leaked, intentionally, some believe. It included language that sent shockwaves across Twitter and Capitol Hill. "Based on the evidence presented by federal whistleblowers and sworn affidavits, we find reasonable grounds to pursue charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 666, theft or bribery concerning programs receiving federal funds." It was now official. The legal walls were closing in. By Sunday, all eyes were on Sacramento. Rumors swirled that a resignation speech had been drafted and was being revised, line, by lawyers, not speechwriters. And Trump? He posted just 2 words on Truth Social, TikTok. By Monday morning, the entire nation was watching. News helicopters circled above the California state capitol. Reporters lined the marble steps. Armed security flanked the entrances, not for protesters, but to manage the overwhelming flood of media. Every major network had cut into their regular programming for what was now being called the Newsom Address. Inside, the mood was surreal. Staffers, once confident and untouchable, shuffled silently through the halls. Most knew what was coming. The last-minute edits to the teleprompter. The confidential legal brief in a sealed manila folder. The absence of Newsom's usual swagger. At precisely 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Gavin Newsom walked to the podium. His face was drawn. His voice calm but strained. The backdrop bore the state seal, but the tone was far from gubernatorial. This wasn't a speech. It was surrender in slow motion. To the people of California and this great nation. I have always served with the belief that our government must be transparent, accountable, and just. Recent developments have cast a shadow over that mission. And though I vehemently deny any criminal intent, I recognize the damage this situation has caused to the trust of the people I was elected to serve. He paused, visibly swallowing the weight of the next line. Effective immediately, I am resigning as Governor of California. The silence in the room was absolute. No applause. No gasps. Just the hum of cameras and the collective realization that a political titan had just fallen, live on national television. Back in Washington, Trump's team moved instantly. His senior advisor Laura McManus appeared on Newsmax just minutes later. "Let this be a message to every corrupt official hiding behind politics: Trump's not done. This is only the first domino." Political analysts exploded with commentary. Some called it a watershed moment. Others feared the precedent of a former president wielding such tactical legal influence. But the public reaction was undeniable. Polls released hours after the speech showed a double-digit jump in Trump's approval among independents. Even moderate Democrats expressed admiration for the strategy, if not the man. In California, Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis was sworn in hastily. Her tone was one of damage control, healing, stability, and moving forward. But for Trump, it was already about the next move. That night, at a rally in Pennsylvania, he addressed the crowd with a smile. They called it revenge. I call it justice. And California was just the beginning. In the days following Gavin Newsom's stunning resignation, a political aftershock rippled through every level of American government. Governors across blue states scrambled to audit emergency contracts and pandemic spending, terrified of becoming the next headline. DNC leadership convened behind closed doors to contain the damage. What began as a California scandal had now become a national reckoning. If Trump can take down Newsom, whispered one nervous party strategist, no one's safe. Even among the Democratic elite, fears grew that Trump had tapped into something deeper, not just legal ammunition, but a new kind of momentum. He hadn't simply beaten Newsom politically. He'd dismantled him through methodical exposure, public pressure, and precise timing. And the public? They were watching with renewed intensity. A new poll from Reuters Ipsos sent shockwaves through D.C., Trump's favorability among swing state independents surged to 61%. Among Hispanic voters, it climbed to 44%, a 12-point jump in 2 weeks. Pundits began calling it the Newsom effect. But beneath the headlines, something more strategic was happening. Trump's team began meeting with key Republican governors and legal minds in states like Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, not just about 2024, but about rebuilding a national legal infrastructure capable of investigating and exposing misconduct at every level. In a leaked memo, Trump's campaign manager reportedly wrote, "We're not just running for office. We're running through the old system. Transparency is now a weapon, and we're wielding it." Meanwhile, within the Democratic Party, the 2028 field fractured. With Newsom out, Kamala Harris's team quietly ramped up media outreach. Pete Buttigieg's aides were spotted at closed-door fundraisers in Michigan. But everyone seemed unsure, shell-shocked, even, as if their playbook had just gone up in smoke. One former Obama advisor put it bluntly on CNN, "Trump's not just reshaping the Republican Party. He's rewriting the entire game." As the 2024 election loomed, Trump's rallies swelled in size and fervor. He now branded himself not merely as a political comeback story, but as a government reformer who takes down the untouchable. And when he was asked at a town hall in Florida whether he would stop at Newsom, Trump grinned and said, "I'll stop when the corruption stops." So no, I'm just getting warmed up. With Newsom gone and the nation still stunned, Washington turned its attention to a looming question: was this Trump versus the Democrats, or Trump versus the entire system? Because behind closed doors, the deeper machinery of government was starting to shudder. Anonymous sources inside federal agencies began leaking messages to the press, mid-level DOJ staffers furious at being bypassed during the investigation, whispers of unease inside the CIA, even subtle resistance from career bureaucrats who viewed Trump's maneuver not as justice, but as disruption. "He's not just flipping the chessboard," one source from the State Department told Politico. "He's setting it on fire." Suddenly, old figures from the pre-2016 establishment began reappearing on television. Former intelligence heads. Ex-White House chiefs of staff. Legacy media anchors. Their message was veiled, but unmistakable: beware of those who prosecute with too much passion. It starts with corruption, and ends with control. To many, it was a warning. To Trump's base, it was a confession. Social media exploded with a new rallying cry, #DrainTheSystem, a revived evolution of the old "Drain the Swamp" chant, only now with clearer targets and a real-time body count: political careers, contracts, donors, and consultants who had once been untouchable. And Trump wasn't done sharpening his blade. In a Fox News interview, he hinted at the next phase: "You think Newsom was the only one playing with federal funds? Look at New York. Look at Illinois. This isn't a red versus blue issue, it's corruption versus America." At the same time, GOP leadership, long resistant to Trump's scorched earth tactics, suddenly fell in line. Why? Because the results were undeniable. Poll numbers. Donations. Energy. Every measurable political metric was swinging Trump's way. And on Capitol Hill, several Republican lawmakers introduced the American Accountability Act, a Trump-endorsed bill to create an independent, state-level audit task force with subpoena power over all federally funded emergency contracts. Democrats called it a power grab. But behind closed doors, they were panicking. One DNC strategist was quoted privately as saying, "If we don't find a way to counter this, legally, not just politically, we may not survive 2024. He's not playing by the old rules anymore. He's writing them." And in a primetime interview, Trump sealed the theme of this new chapter: the old guard is falling. The only question now is who's next. As summer stretched into election season, one thing became clear: Trump's campaign was no longer just about returning to office. It had become a full-scale assault on the political infrastructure of the United States, and he was winning. The media, once confident in its ability to control the narrative, was fractured. Legacy outlets scrambled to frame Trump's takedown of Gavin Newsom as reckless or dangerous, but the public wasn't buying it. Across the country, Americans, Republican, Independent, and even disillusioned Democrats, were starting to echo a different phrase: maybe it took someone like him to do what no one else would. And then, the endgame moved into place. In a nationally televised address from Mar-a-Lago, Donald J. Trump stepped up to the podium with two flags behind him, one American, and one white with a golden eagle, the symbol of the newly unveiled American Oversight Council, a private public watchdog coalition formed by former prosecutors, military veterans, and tech analysts. Its mission: expose corruption at every level, across both parties. "This is no longer just about me," Trump said. "It's about cleaning out the rot that's been protected for decades. If the government won't investigate itself, we will." The announcement sent shockwaves through Washington. The council was legal. It was funded. And it had already compiled a list of 37 state and federal officials under review, Democrats and Republicans. Overnight, the phrase "endgame" became more than a metaphor. It was a movement. Meanwhile, the 2024 campaign trail looked nothing like years past. Trump didn't need to promise reform. He was delivering it, live, case by case. His rallies turned into forums for whistleblowers. His ads featured newly unsealed documents, not slogans. And his base? It grew by millions. For Gavin Newsom, now secluded from public life and under federal watch, the fall was complete. A cautionary tale. A symbol of what happens when power is protected by silence, until it isn't. And for Washington, the writing was on the wall: the old era of quiet corruption had ended. Trump, once dismissed as unpredictable, had become inevitable. And in the final words of his closing speech at the GOP National Convention, he left no doubt: they built a kingdom of shadow deals and lies. But I lit the match. The endgame is now. And we, the American people, will finish it. The day Donald Trump officially accepted the Republican nomination, something had shifted, not just in politics, but in the air. The tone wasn't celebratory. It was victorious. In that moment, the nation wasn't watching a candidate, they were watching a crusade near its final chapter. From the massive convention hall in Milwaukee, Trump stood still for a long moment before speaking. The crowd was silent, sensing the gravity. Then he began, not with bravado, but with clarity: "They mocked me. They tried to bury me in investigations. But I outlasted them. I exposed them. And now, we're going to finish what we started." He didn't speak about Democrats. He spoke about the system, the insiders, the lifers, the bureaucrats who thought they were untouchable. And as he listed names: Newsom, former agency heads, political donors, shadow groups, the crowd didn't just cheer. They stood. Outside, people were already calling it the new Tea Party, but it wasn't about taxes. It was about truth. And in the weeks that followed, the impact was undeniable. State legislatures began passing transparency laws modeled after the revelations in California. Whistleblowers from states like Illinois, Oregon, and even New York began reaching out to Trump's Oversight Council. For the first time in decades, federal employees feared losing their jobs, for misconduct, not politics. Even some liberal commentators admitted it: we may not like Trump, but he proved the system protects itself. And he broke it open. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom remained silent. Indictments still loomed. And the Democratic Party, fractured, leaderless, and bruised, struggled to regain its footing. Trump, meanwhile, toured the country like a man who already held office. He spoke less about running, and more about restoring. His campaign slogan morphed quietly, from "Make America Great Again" to "Finish what we started." On the final night before the election, Trump gave one last televised message: "You gave me 4 years. They tried to undo it. Now you're giving me 4 more, and this time, we're not just draining the swamp. We're bulldozing it." The next morning, lines stretched around voting centers across the country. Love him or hate him, everyone knew, the endgame wasn't just a campaign, it was a reckoning. And America had chosen sides.